Hello again, fam. I'm Marina, immigrant, cultural researcher, and professional overthinker of all things South Asian. I make videos about migration, culture, and why we cannot escape sharam, no matter where we go. I recently completed my PhD, and my topic of study was, you guessed it, migration. And one thing that really stood out to me in my exploration of migration experiences, particularly in the stories of South Asian immigrants like myself, that everyone I spoke to had some kind of family, like an uncle or cousin or relative that had moved abroad, not just to Canada, although a lot of them did move there, but also to places like the UK, Australia, and the Middle East. And this relative had somehow become the catalyst of migration for their family. My own dad was one of those uncles living in the Middle East who had actually moved because of another uncle who had offered him a job. And then I also had a mamu in London, a cousin in Australia, and my husband's entire extended family's based in different parts of Canada. I guess I'm also going to be that one auntie in Australia for my family who sends them duty-free chocolates and asks, "Beta, what are your future plans?" and complains about the air quality back home. On a serious note though, this shared South Asian experience of immigration got me wondering, why is this the case? Is migration just in our DNA? Did we all get a secret memo? And what does this really mean for our community and our place in Western society today? So in today's masala-packed video, I'm going to dive into these questions. What I will be covering is why we started moving to Western countries. How has South Asian migration evolved from our sojourning uncle era to now? And the cultural impact of South Asian migration. So, as it turns out, South Asians have been moving for generations. First, it was the partition, then the Gulf boom, and then places like the US, Australia, and Canada opened their doors. And our uncles packed their parathas and their dreams, and off they went. But our migration story actually starts way before that. The early stages of the South Asian migration can be traced back to between 1834 and 1917. During this period, Britain transported roughly 2 million Indian indentured workers to its colonies. So it included places like Fiji, Mauritius, Guyana, Malaysia, Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. These were not people looking for adventure. They were in fact forced labor. The British called it indentured servitude, a contract that meant you couldn't leave until it ended. Over this period, we also saw the migration of some of the first South Asians in America, largely from Punjab in pre-partition India. Punjabi families often sent their men abroad to secure multiple lines of income. Many of these men served in the British Army, so they had geographical mobility, and by 1908, around 5,000 South Asians, almost 90% of them from Punjab origin, were living in British Columbia in Canada. Meanwhile, in Australia, the first South Asian migrants arrived between 1800 and 1860, mainly as indentured workers and household servants to British immigrants, and some also as cameleers to assist with the early exploration of the Australian outback. Around the mid-19th century, a different type of South Asian migrant was emerging and making their way mainly to Britain. These were students from wealthy families, professionals, even princes on official visits. A few of these influential people actually went on to lead the independence movement in India. This included Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, I do want to point out that early migration histories focus a lot on men, but during this period, women did also migrate. Sometimes as indentured workers on plantations, but more often they moved to join their spouses as part of family migration. While the men worked to build a life in foreign land, the women were left managing the home and raising the next generation of diaspora kids. So, what happened after we started moving? Well, enter the sojourning uncle era. After 1947 and towards the end of the World War II, South Asians started migrating to places like Canada, New Zealand, the UK, the US, and Australia, and they all had very different reasons for their migration. Some were escaping civil war, seeking better economic opportunities, or reuniting with their family members that had already moved and settled abroad. During this period, migration to Western countries was mostly driven by labor shortages. And once again, it was mainly men, especially those from middle-class backgrounds with prior experience in colonial army or police forces, who took up these opportunities to move. Eventually, their families and relatives joined them, leading to the formation of South Asian diaspora communities in Western societies. Think Southall in London, also known as Little Punjab, Brampton in Canada, also known as Browntown, or Harris Park in Sydney, which is known as Little India. Our sojourning uncles and their families faced a lot of hardships and racism in these early migration phases. Take Brampton in Canada, for example, where a lot of researchers and political scientists like Kristen Good has written about the struggles of South Asians integrating into Canadian society. We see similar experiences of racism across other South Asian diaspora communities in other Western countries as well. Every Desi uncle has at least one story about being mistaken for a taxi driver, getting weird looks for bringing curry to work, or being told, wow, your English is so good. And let's be honest, some of this actually still happens today. Hey, they survived, thrived, and now they own their own companies, businesses, and even empires. After all that struggle, you know they're gonna flex. That's why every uncle has a when I first got here story that always starts with something about moving with just $2 in their pocket, working 20-hour shifts in factories, and surviving on dal and determination. That's why. But here's the thing. These early migrants laid the foundation. They filled crucial labor gaps and set up businesses and built entire communities that made it easier for future generations to migrate. Back in the 1970s and 80s, South Asian migration to places like Canada, the UK, Australia was largely working class through programs of labor recruitment and family migration schemes. But in the 1990s and the 2000s, things shifted. Government started prioritizing international students and skilled immigration programs, targeting engineers, doctors, accountants, and IT specialists. Suddenly, your parents telling you to become an engineer wasn't just a career suggestion, it was a well thought out migration strategy. This hard work and perseverance is often credited as a major factor in South Asian success in Western societies across academia, business, politics, media, and so on. For me personally, being a woman and the first female in my family to migrate abroad to Australia, there was a lot of pressure to not fail. My family was super supportive, but coming from a conservative community, I felt like I had to work extra hard, both as an international student and as a Pakistani woman living abroad. It was like carrying an invisible checklist of do not embarrass your entire bloodline. That constant pressure just pushed me to work really hard as an immigrant. Failure wasn't really an option for me, not because I was afraid of failing, but because the thought of my mom hearing, "I told you so" from some distant aunty, that was terrifying. Now, I do want to note, modern migration may seem more privileged because of skilled visa schemes and education to migration pathways, but it does come with its own set of challenges. And there's a lot more that I can say about this because this was the more specific topic of my PhD, but I will save that for another time. So now let's talk about how South Asian migration shaped and influenced the culture in Western society. I honestly think that we're experiencing kind of a brown moment, a time when South Asian culture is more visible, influential, and mainstream in Western societies across politics, business, tech, academia, media, and pop culture, and beyond. South Asians are not just participating in Western societies, they are actively reshaping them. But I also feel that as we rise, that deep-rooted sense of sharam tends to linger. And I feel that this feeling of shame or guilt or Desi humility is generational. Our parents and grandparents moved abroad and were taught to always keep their heads down, to work hard, but never really make waves. Now we're out in this world disrupting entire industries, yet some part of us still feels like we need permission permission to celebrate, permission to be seen. And let's not forget the sharm associated with existing between two cultures. Like many immigrants, I personally feel too Western to be Desi and too Desi to be Western, and it's a constant negotiation of how much brownness or whiteness is too much. As we build careers, buy homes, and raise our families in the West, I often wonder whether our sojourning uncles would be proud or would they be deeply confused. Because let's be honest, the majority of those first-gen uncles didn't move abroad to self-actualize or find work-life balance. They hustled, they saved and sent money back home, and their sacrifices paved the way for us to have choices they never had. While they flex their migration as the ultimate achievement, many of us now question whether migration even is the goal. Of course, this is just my opinion. I guess my real question is, as we integrate more into Western society, what do we keep and what do we lose? And most importantly, when will the West finally start pronouncing our names correctly? Please just do it, guys. We have too much sharm to correct you. If you've got an uncle, auntie, or cousin abroad, or you are the uncle, auntie, or cousin abroad, please drop in your best immigration story in the comments. Please consider supporting my channel by liking and subscribing so I can continue making these videos and diving into all the masala-packed facets of South Asian migration culture and our tumultuous relationship with sharm. Until next time, take care.